Hello and welcome to today's Missio Nexus webinar. I'm Heather Pubels, the founder of Leitmotif, communications consulting firm and Missio Nexus member organization. I'm also the editor of Evangelical Missions Quarterly. I'm partnering with Missio Nexus to discover topics and find effective presenters that can address ways mission agencies can improve their marketing and communications efforts. Before we get started with the webinar, I want to let you know that Missio Nexus has a group called Communications. If you are involved in marketing or communications with a mission agency, this group is for you. It's a great place for you to meet, learn from, and be encouraged by others in your domain. At the end of this webinar, I'll give you instructions on how to find and sign up for that group. For today, Matt Green will be presenting our webinar entitled How to Share Your Organization's Message Through Self-Publishing Books. Matt is the Vice President of Marketing for Pioneers. His team creates media content that inspires God's people to take the next step in pursuing his glory among the nations. Before joining Pioneers, Matt served as the editor of Ministry Today, a journal for pastors and church leaders. Matt, can you tell me a little bit about the sticker that's on the back of your computer?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. If you can read it, which it might be readable on screen there, it says no more unreached people groups. And this is the focus of Pioneers, the organization that I serve. And our focus is mobilizing teams to glorify God among unreached people groups by initiating church planting movements in partnership with local churches. And so we created these stickers a few years ago and have used them at events and given them out. Many of you probably noticed the trend of people taking stickers and putting them on their water bottles or their computers or their phones. And so our goal was to kind of tap into that and let the people that love Pioneers do some of the marketing for us. And they've been kind of a success. We've enjoyed getting them out there.
That's really cool, Matt. All right, we're going to finish with our opening announcements. Just remember, everyone, to please put your questions in the chat panel as you think of them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And Matt, it's great to have you here with us today, and welcome. Go ahead and you can share your screen.
So it's great to have an opportunity to share our story here at Pioneers and some of the things we've learned along the way of using books as a marketing resource, as a way of advocating our cause, of getting the word out. Pioneers created a publishing imprint, and we've published about 25 books over the last 10 years. And so I just want to share with you some of the things that we've learned along the way, the pros and cons of this model of publishing, and some of the practical steps that you can use to get started. It's maybe not as hard as you would imagine, but if I would have had someone early on kind of give me some of the tips and the some of the ways of avoiding pitfalls prior to starting, I think it would have been helpful. So I hope we can do some of that today. For background on what we've done and learned here at Pioneers, here are just some of the covers of the books that we've done over the years. And these would include books like our flagship book, When God Comes Calling, which is the story of our founder and Ted Fletcher and his journey to starting Pioneers. And so this has been a great premium we've given out. We've also distributed on Amazon and an ebook and audiobook over the years. And I would say we've probably sold or distributed about 25,000 copies, both internally and even more than that, probably externally in different outlets. And currently we're in the 4th edition of that book. So we've made some adjustments along the way, and that's what publishing it ourselves has given us the freedom to do that. Also, another example would be When Everything is Missions, which is a partnership book that we published and also brought in 1615 to participate in writing that book along with our VP of Church Partnerships. And we've sold and distributed probably about 10,000 copies of that internally and in the trade and digitally since we launched that in 2016. This one is Spiritual Survival Handbook for Cross-Cultural Workers. Probably consistently distributed probably about 15,000 over the years internally and with trade and digital platforms since we published that in 2012. And that would be a resource that we use for people that are joining the organization, but it's also been adopted and used by people outside of Pioneers as well. This one, Treachery on the Twisted River, is a revised young adult version of the mission classic Peace Child. And so it is designed for young adults. It's a little bit more accessible, but I think it's readable as well for adults, and it's not just for kids. So that's another example of a resource that we've created. Finally, this would be 30 Years Among South Seas Cannibals, which is the story of John Patton. This is a public domain book text that we made some slight modernizations to, and then simply republished it with some updated language, and did not have to pay any licensing fees or anything on that because it was in the public domain. So that's some examples of some of the things that we've done over the years with our publishing imprint. I think that as I look at some of the reasons why I think it's a good idea for an organization or a ministry to consider launching a publishing imprint, here's some of the points that I would just make on that. It's that really there's a value perception that you can get with books, physical books, that you may not get with some of the other marketing materials that you create. I think about the amount of time that a reader will spend with a book if they actually read it or listen to it on audio. And I think about the access that you have to their heart and their mind and their emotions through a book that you may not have through other resources. I think nowadays with the use of video, that is obviously an amazing asset that organizations have to be able to capture people's imaginations and their hearts. But books reach people on a different level, and they're able to convey in-depth content in a way I think that's compelling if they're done well. I think also you can exploit the pass-along exposure of branded content with a book, because not only will the book be read by the people that initially purchase it or are given it, but it can also be passed along to other people, and it could end up reaching many more people than simply the one person who initially got it. Another reason would be you can use a book to create internal learning and onboarding resources for your staff, whether it's be new people coming into your missions pipeline or donors or church partners. It's just a great resource to have if you need to convey a message in depth, or if you have some form of advocacy that you really want to pursue with them. A book is a great way to do that. I think also that it reaches people with different content preferences. There are people that I think video, particularly in this generation, video will be a great method of connecting with them and engaging them. But there's also people that their preferred way of connecting and learning is through a book. And so that is another reason I think that books are valuable. Now, what I would add to this, though, is that they will never be able to replace a solid web strategy or a social media strategy or your podcasts or your videos. However, a book will complement that. It will provide intersections, and those products will generate attraction and attention to your book. And then also your book can be used to generate attention to those resources as well. So that's why it really does, a book has a place in your marketing strategy. It doesn't necessarily replace anything, but it has a fit. So just want to talk a little bit about some of the use cases you might have for books. Hard and soft premiums. So these would be physical books that you can give away. A lot of ministries and organizations give books to new donors or new candidates as they come into the ministry pipeline. And so books are a great way to convey gratitude for people that are donors, or to also just bring people into a deeper understanding of your organization. A soft premium, like an ebook, would function in much the same way. It may not have the same pass-along value, or maybe the prestige of a physical book, but definitely from a cost standpoint, much more easy to distribute and to get into the hands of people, as long as you own the rights to that book and you don't have to pay a licensing fee for distributing it. I think another way would be, like I said, onboarding and training people, brand education, advocacy, and then another thing would be, an important thing could be your executive platform development. And what I mean by that is your organization may have leaders, whether it's your president or leaders of different departments in your organization, who have a message or who have things that they need to say or things that reflect well on your organization. And a book is a great way to get that out. We here at Pioneers we're partnered with Moody to publish our president's first book, Is the Commission Still Great? And for reasons I'll probably get into later in this webinar, I'll explain why we chose to go with a traditional publisher with that book. But this was a great way for us to get the message of our organization out, and also to enhance the platform of our president, and in so doing benefit the organization as well. So those are some of the things that you get from publishing a book. I did want to highlight the revenue generation part of it. I think it's important when you think about revenue generation from a self-published book or an organizational published book, is that you do not have the same purposes behind publishing a book as a traditional publisher would, or perhaps a business or an individual who this is part of their income would have for publishing a book. So it's important to recognize all of those objectives in the course of publishing a book, and see that it may not just be about the money that you can generate from book sales, because you would not see, if you were thinking about other marketing efforts, you would not necessarily look at them in terms of the revenue they generate. You may be looking at them in their value and their objectives based on the brand exposure that resource will give you, or other values. And I think that's important when it comes to a book, because the primary purpose for us, I know for the books that we published, has been for brand awareness and brand education. It has not been for revenue generation. Now, I will say that if we can cover our expenses in both the production and editorial and printing of the book, then that's great, because that frees up more resources for ministry. But it's not as though we're looking at it primarily through a financial grid. And so those are some of the use cases I would see for an organization publishing books. Some of the pros, I think that in publishing a book, an organization can bypass the narrow grid of traditional publishers. You probably know, if you're on this webinar, that missions is not a lucrative area for book publishing. Traditional publishers need to at least cover their expenses. And when they acquire a new author or a new title, these are the priorities that they have in mind. They may have message goals and a mission, an organizational mission in terms of their publishing priorities, but ultimately they need to cover their expenses. And not all books that a publisher publishes will cover its own expenses. Not every book will cover its own expenses. So they're looking for some of those books that will be outliers in terms of revenue to be able to cover their overall expenses. And that's kind of their goal when it comes to publishing books. And so publishing your own book allows you to kind of bypass that grid that a publisher might have. Another thing to consider is the low risk in production costs that can be achieved now with new technology in publishing. In the past, if an organization wanted to publish a book, they might need to invest quite a bit for both the production and the printing of a book. But with print-on-demand technology today, it allows us to print low numbers of a book at a low risk, and not have to deal with warehouse expenses and things like that, and also still be able to get the book out and have it done well, have it produced well, have it designed well, and not have to deal with some of those risks that come with producing thousands and thousands of books at a time. Another thing is the access to ebook and audiobook publishing channels, which were not available in the past. And if you published a book as an organization, you would have no ability to get it into the trade. And by what I mean by the trade would be your book would not be accessible by people who go into a bookstore, a Christian bookstore, or go on Amazon. They wouldn't be able to purchase your book because it wouldn't be accessible. And so nowadays, with some of the new both technology and companies that are out there, you are able to publish a book and it will be accessible in all the places that a traditionally published book would be accessible. And that's a very compelling thing to be able to do as an organization. Another benefit would be that sales profits are not shared with the publisher. And this can be a significant thing over the course of the life of a book. And we'll talk a little bit later about what some of these numbers look like in terms of hypothetical expenses and revenues that can come from a book. Publishers offer as little as 10 to 15% in royalties, and yet they're doing less and less in terms of marketing for books because of the costs surrounding traditional publishing. So even though they may accept you as an author and publish your book, they will not be investing thousands of dollars in advertising and in marketing to get that book out. They will expect you as the author or as the organization that has produced this book to be the one that's investing your time and energy to make this happen. I think another thing that I would note here too is editorial control and brand alignment. If you publish a book yourself, both, and this goes both ways, obviously, you are responsible for the brand alignment of that book with your organization's mission, vision, and values. But also you have a freedom that you would not necessarily have with a traditional publisher. They will have an editorial grid. They will have concerns and objectives that they will want to achieve with your book that may or may not align with what you want to do. And so by publishing a book yourself, you're able to bypass that and maintain control over the content of the book, the design of the book, the publishing, the distribution, all the things that a publisher would have control over, you have control over as the organizational publisher of that book. So those are some of the pros that I would point out. Cons, though, let's talk about the cons. If you decide to publish a book yourself as an organization, while your book will be available in the trade, in other words, people will be able to order it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or if they go into a bookstore, the bookstore will be able to go into their database and purchase a copy or stock the book on their shelves. It is very unlikely that bookstores will actually stock co-published or self-published titles. They have very limited shelf space to work with, and so they are going to be featuring books that they have a high level of confidence will move for them. And so it's unlikely that they'll stock your book. But as we'll see later, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, I think. I think that the flip side of what I said in the last slide, design, editorial, production, and marketing are your responsibility. So that might seem like a fairly minor thing, but once you go down the path of designing and editing a book and producing it in a way that is competitive in the market, that is not just an easy thing to do. There's definitely challenges with that. And that is your responsibility as an organizational publisher to take on all of those tasks if you want the book to be received well and to reflect and represent your brand in a way that is excellent. I think also there is a lower value perception of self-published books in the market. Sometimes there's a sense that books that are self-published, if the imprint is not immediately recognizable, there could be some negative perceptions of the book, or simply no perceptions at all if people don't recognize the publisher. That being said, there are more and more books out there that are published this way, and so it's become very common. And I think also those obstacles can be overcome for the most part with high quality design, editorial oversight, production quality, because the printing quality nowadays is easily competitive with anything that you would get out of a mainstream publisher. So physically, the book does not need to look or feel any different than a traditionally published book because of the print-on-demand technology that's available. One other thing I would mention here too is you have a high required wholesale discount. So what that means is if you publish a book, any publisher, and they want to distribute the book in the trade, in Amazon or Barnes & Noble or others like that, those retailers are going to have a pretty much flat discount that they're going to demand. a wholesale discount, which is typically about 55%. So 55% of the retail costs of the book is what you're going to be required to sell it to Amazon for, so that they can sell it to their customers. So for a $20 book, that could be, 55% off a $20 book be about $11. So that leaves $9 to cover all the other expenses of producing that book. And we'll talk a little bit later with some numbers, and I can show those to you, what that actually looks like in the real world. But so those are some of the cons, I think, that come with organizationally self-publishing a book. I do want to pause here because I feel like I've just been kind of talking nonstop, and I didn't know, Heather, if there were any questions that had come in that I might be able to address from what we've talked about so far.
Somebody is asking a little bit more to learn more about print on demand, but I assume you'll be getting to that soon.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But I guess just in summary, what print on demand is it's the ability to print single copies or low volume copies of a book without dealing with the risks and the cost of large quantities. Now, that being said, those individual copies are nowhere near as inexpensive as printing 1,000 or 1,500 or 5,000 or 10,000 copies of a book. But of course, the risk is much lower. And I think as we go further in the presentation, we'll have some actual numbers I can give you from the company that we use. And it's between $5 and $6 to print a single 250-page book. So that's not too bad when you consider that you could turn around and sell that book for $10 or $15. So you could easily make back that expense. But if you were to print many more copies of that book, which is what traditional publishers do, the cost per book drops precipitously down to less than $1 in some cases. So you can see how this is really, you're weighing the question of risk in terms of how many copies you want to have in a warehouse. How confident are you that you can move those copies and sell them? Any more, Heather?
That's all we have for now.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about the unique advantages of organizational self-publishing. The first would be an organization has an existing platform that an individual does not have. So if you're up to speed on your marketing strategy and your organizational presence on the web, you have a platform that probably far exceeds that of an individual person who wants to publish their own book. You have a website that probably has thousands of visitors every year. You may have social channels that also get attention. You may have email lists that you can market to, or physical address lists that you can market to. These are all advantages that an organization has and its leader has by virtue of their position in their market that an individual does not have. And so that does make an organization and an organizational leader more attractive in the traditional publishing world if you want to publish using that model. I think another thing is just the fulfillment and warehouse capabilities. So if as an organization you want to invest in a larger quantity of books, knowing that you'll be able to move them either through sales or through premiums or giveaways or gifts, then you might have a warehouse that you can store those books in. You may have a fulfillment staff or volunteers that you can utilize to send those books out. And the risk is much lower than if you're an individual attempting to do that same thing. And therefore you can benefit from volume costs of printing your book. And that goes into the third one as well, is as an organization, you may have the financial capacity to invest in stock of the book. And therefore, you can have your profit margins will be higher should you be selling the book, or if you're distributing it for free, your cost per book is much lower. And so that becomes a premium or marketing piece that is reasonable comparatively, because of your ability to do all those things that you can that are unique to an organization. So that's something really to consider, is leveraging those resources of your organization in this area, and also being conservative and careful and a good steward of your resources, but recognizing you have a unique advantage when it comes to this. And that unique advantage, I would say, is not just exclusive to self-publishing. You can take that same advantage and leverage it with a traditional publisher and go to a Tyndale or a Moody or a Zondervan and say, look, this is our organizational footprint. So we believe that we can successfully move books if you were to publish them on our behalf. So I would say that's something to consider as well as you're looking at this, is even though this webinar is primarily about self-publishing as an organization, that is not, some of the same principles apply to working with a traditional publisher as well. So let's talk about some of the landmines here. And some of these may be no-brainers, others might be a bit more unusual when you think about them. But
hey, Matt, can I interrupt for just 1 second?
Sure.
We've got a question in here from Gabriella about what is a realistic budget range for self-publishing, including editors, book design, etc.
That'll be on a future slide.
Okay.
We will get there. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about IP and rights liabilities. So when I say IP, I mean intellectual property. As an organization, most organizations, most ministries are structured in such a way that books that are written within the course of one's employment with your organization are considered works for hire. And therefore, the intellectual property belongs to the organization, and royalties should not be distributed directly to the employees. And so that can become a challenge when you're dealing with people in the organization that want to publish books with you, and they may want to receive the benefits of those. And that can be done, but it must be clear who owns the rights to those books. And this is not just an organization being rigid or controlling with their intellectual property. This relates to legal ramifications, particularly if you're audited, and or even the auditor that your organization and your finance team would retain for an annual audit will be looking for these kinds of arrangements and wondering whether revenue is being generated outside of the normal places as a result of creative content that's been developed by staff, and are they getting money outside of the organization or outside of their normal compensation as a result of that. So these are some landmines to think about when it comes to that, and tax and legal compliance that you would have with selling books, and making sure that if you're selling them, that you're collecting sales tax appropriately. Even as a nonprofit, you would need to do that. And then I think also market interests is a concern. It's a potential landmine. Your perception of the market interest in your book may be exaggerated. And that is something that a traditional publisher would help you navigate. They would help you figure out whether the book that you think needs to be written is actually going to have a readership. And so by essentially doing it yourself, you might be bypassing some of that insight that can come from a publisher and help you understand the market's true interest in your topic. Another thing would be overprinting. You could become really aggressive and want to save a bunch of money by printing a lot of copies of a book. And these volume discounts can tempt you to print too many books, and it could lead to a delay in recovering your initial investment. So there's definitely a balance there in terms of that. I think also quality. Traditional publishers have refined their processes and their workflow for editorial and production quality control. And so mistakes in this area can be pretty embarrassing and costly. And publishers have a lot of stop gaps to make sure that doesn't happen. But you, as your first time publishing a book as an organization, may not have those same quality control standards in place, and it could result in some embarrassing or costly mistakes in terms of designing and printing and publishing a book. Another thing would be returns. So retailers such as Amazon have 3 months to return unsold books once they've purchased them. These will need to be shipped back to you at your expense, or they need to be destroyed, and you choose which one of those you want to do. And these costs are then deducted from sales proceeds. So you really don't see the proceeds from sales until at least 3 months after the sale. And once that happens, then the cost of both printing and any returns are deducted from that, and that's what you would receive from the distributor. So those are some of the things. I think also mentioning editorial and quality control, production quality, so that I mentioned that a little bit before. I think the complexity of royalty distributions, if you are going to publish multiple books by people within your organization, you need to distribute those as compensation or salary to people. That can be complex doing that. I mentioned returns. And then finally, just the supply chain problems that we are facing right now in the publishing world that can lead to long waits or long turnaround times for printing large quantity of books. And this is affecting every publisher, small and large. So it's not something that's just exclusively having an impact on small self-publishers or micro publishers or traditional publishers. It is a serious problem that's facing the industry there. So those are some of the landmines there. So now I want to talk about the platforms. So these would be the printing and distribution platforms that I would recommend and that are available out there. There may be more here, but these are the ones that are kind of the lions in the industry, and you may already be familiar with them, but I just want to bring them to your attention. The first one would be this company will be able to take care of both your printing, your print on demand, as well as offset large run prints. And that is Ingram and Lightning Source. Ingram is the parent company, and then Lightning Source is one of the subsidiaries that manages their print on demand and direct to retail or direct to wholesale publishing. So that is lightningsource.com. I would say the interfaces and the website are not necessarily that fun or easy to navigate, but once you master it, it will make sense to you. So that would be for printing on demand, as well as getting books into the trade. Ingram is the distributor. So this would allow you to get a book that you publish, that you've created, out and available in Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Any retailer would be able to purchase them from Ingram because it is a mainstay distributor in the book publishing world. And then of course you have Amazon KDP, which used to be simply Kindle distribution and publishing, and now they also do physical print physical books and get them into distribution. So I can't say too much about that company and that service, but it's something that's worth considering. I don't know how competitive it is from a printing standpoint with Ingram Lightning Source as far as print costs, so you'd want to look into that yourself, but that's another option. And then, of course, in doing so on Amazon, you would then have access to their ebook Kindle distribution as well. And then there is Apple iBooks. So this is where you would distribute your ebook in the iBooks store, and it would be available to people that have iTunes accounts to be able to purchase your book. And then Barnes & Noble Nook is another one. And the Nook is a device similar to the Kindle that reads ebooks. And so that's one. There's also several others that are out there as well that are smaller in the industry, but those are some of the large ones. So that would cover printing and distribution. As far as design and production, if you do not have a team in your organization that is able to handle designing a cover or editing a book or laying out the pages or doing the copy editing and proofing, then Upwork is a great freelancing platform that allows you to find people for whom this is their expertise and then hire them to work on a project/contract basis to take care of some of these services, as well as Fiverr.com is another one. And I would say I would recommend these not just for book publishing, but if you are an organization that does not have the capacity to have a marketing staff or marketing team with designers and writers and editors, you can find people all over the world that will work on projects for you and do a good job. Obviously, you have to do your due diligence in determining whether they have the skills necessary, but definitely a low risk place to find temporary staff for different projects. And we've utilized them over the years here at Pioneers, and I know others have as well. So those are the platforms. Now let's talk a little about the process. What does it look like? And so I have two slides here this first slide kind of lays out the different elements of the process. And then when I flip to the second slide, it'll answer the question of what some of the estimated costs are around some of these items here. So obviously, if you're going to publish a book, you've got to have the editorial content. You've got to have the book itself. And so you need to have someone to write it. And that could be, the book is already written and you're just looking for a place to get it out. But that's obviously the first element of the process. And then depending on the quality of the manuscript, you may want it to be developmentally edited. So that could be someone who reconstructs parts of the book and rewrites them because maybe the person that wrote them didn't have the skills necessary to really bring it into a professional manuscript format. So a developmental editor would have the skills necessary to kind of piece it together in a way that's compelling and understandable to the reader. And then after that, you would probably want it to be copy edited. So that would be, looking at things like accuracy and fact checking, grammar, some of the big picture things that we would do if we're hiring a copy editor to do anything. And then proofing. And you could do proofing in the manuscript itself before it's laid out, or you may decide to do it later on after it's been typeset in its book format. I would say most mainstream publishers would not wait. They would do proofing earlier on in the process, and then they'd probably do another 1 or 2 rounds of proofing after the book has been laid out and it's in its book format and it's been designed. But there are ways to save some money in terms of waiting to do some of that final proofing toward the end, depending on what your risk factor is there. And then you would have your publishing platform management. So that's where I was talking about Lightning Source and Ingram and some of the ebook platforms, is you would be, need to set up an account on that platform, and you would have to provide them financial information for where proceeds and from the sale of books will be going to. So banking information. You would also want to provide them with your nonprofit information so that you can benefit from not paying taxes on books that you print for yourself. And also just setting up the metadata for each book so that the category, the ISBN number, which is another thing you need to purchase, which is, I didn't actually have that on here, but that's available online, purchasing an ISBN, which is required for distribution in the trade. And then just all, the minutia around setting the price of the book and making sure that the cover image and cover thumbnail is correctly aligned so that when it goes out into the different retailers, it looks right on the online e-commerce sites. And then you've got cover design. And I would definitely say don't scrimp on this because people do judge a book on its cover. And so invest in making sure that the book cover is well designed and matches what you're going to see in the market and in the trade out there, as well as represents your brand in an excellent way. And then you'd also have production. So this would be the layout of the book. And this is a professional task. Not anybody can do this. It requires a specialized knowledge of design and publishing platforms to be able to lay out a book in a way that when it's sent to the printer, they are not going to push it back to you and say, we can't print this. So that's a specialized skill. But as I noted in the previous slides, there are people that can do this on Upwork, on Fiverr, other places like that, or even on your staff, you may have people that have those skills. And then once it's been laid out and multiple layers of editing have been done, then you move on to typesetting proof, which would be really looking at the physical visual layout of the book, making sure that the page numbers all are on in, and the running head at the top with the title of the book or the title of chapter is there, and make sure that the margins are correct. And if there are images, that they are placed properly on the page. So that would be your final proof there of the book. And then at that point, you can essentially export it as a PDF from your design platform and upload it to the printer and begin purchasing books immediately once that has been accepted by the printer and a proof has been generated that you approve. And then you would take it and turn it into an ebook using ebook conversion platform or hiring someone to do that. And then that's when we move on to marketing and sales of the book. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell. There's a lot of different subpoints in there that you'll discover, but and as far as the main outline, that's what you would be doing. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the costs associated with this, estimated costs. And you'll see there's a huge range. Writing, I didn't even put a cost there because that's, who knows how much it would cost for someone to write a book and what type of investment they'll make in that. And so I'm assuming you already have a manuscript that you want to publish. And so looking at developmental editing, it could be $1,000 or less if you decide you don't need it. You wouldn't necessarily have to invest in developmental editing, but you will definitely want to invest in copy editing, and that could be $300 to $500, or if not more. These are just rough ranges. It would all depend on the complexity of the manuscript and the length of it as well. And then proofing, another $100 to $200. The publishing platform management is typically free, so you might pay an initial fee to upload your file to be printed. There might be like a $75 or $80 fee to submit your file, but that's a one-time fee. And then you would pay an annual distribution fee of maybe $15 or $20 to keep that book in the trade, in distribution. So not a huge cost in that area. Your cover design could be $500 to $1,000 or even more, depending on how much you want to invest in it or how complex of a cover design it is. And you see some of these other expenses here, from layout to typesetting, proof, to printing, ebook production, and marketing and sales. And these numbers could fluctuate pretty significantly depending on how much you want to invest in these areas. You'll notice on the printing amount there that's highly dependent on how many copies you decide to print at a time. If you decide to print one copy of your book, that's going to cost you about $5. Now, I wouldn't recommend it because of the investment you're going to make in producing it, but you could print a single copy and it would be about $5. Or you could invest in a larger print run and print, maybe 20,000 copies of the book or 15,000 copies of the book, and you'd spend about $20,000 depending on the length and the number of pages in the book. So those are some of the estimated costs around the process. And this is very rough because a lot of it depends on what you decide to invest in or the state of the manuscript once you've received it. So any questions, Heather, I can tackle before I move on here?
I think we're still good. You can continue on.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about sales profits here. So this chart here would be related to your profits in the trade. So this would be for books that you have published yourself that are now available using Lightning Source and Ingram or one of those other platforms. And they are available for purchase on Amazon.com or on Barnes & Noble or one of the other online retailers, or even in a bookstore, if the bookstore chooses to stock your books. So this would be based on a 250-page book, which you could have a book that's only 150 pages or 120. It doesn't need to be 250, but I'm just giving you numbers based on that. So should you decide to price that book a retail price of $16.99, which is actually kind of low for a 250-page book, you could probably price it up closer to $20. But let's say you started at $16.99. This is how it breaks down. So as I mentioned before, you are required to sell that book on wholesale to Amazon or to another retailer at a 55% discount. So that brings down what you're selling it for. I don't have that number right in front of me, but it's in fact, let me just pull out my handy calculator here and I can tell you what that would be. So if you have a $16.99 book and take away a 55% discount from that, that ends up $7.65. So $7.65 would be the wholesale price of that $17 book. Now you have to take your print costs. So how much is it costing Ingram to print that book before they fulfill it and send it to Amazon, or they might even send it directly to the customer? Well, the print cost is $5.65 because it's being printed one book at a time. Ingram is not going to stock a bunch of books or print a bunch of books in anticipation of you selling them in the trade. They're going to print a book when the order is placed. So they'll print that book and they will deduct $5.65 from that $7.65, and you will, or 64 cents, I guess, and you will end up with a grand total of $2.01 in royalties or profits from that book. So that's obviously not very impressive, but let me show you what that would be like if you published your book with a traditional publisher. Same price, $16.99. And let's say the publisher is generous enough to give you a 15% royalty on the sale of that book. And this is taken into consideration, maybe they haven't given you any advance because they don't know how many your book is going to sell. So in that case, you would get $2.54. So not much more, and possibly even less, depending on the arrangement that they have with you in royalty. So you might get $2.55 for that book from the publisher in author compensation. So as far as the trade, a couple things to point out here, and that is that it's not really a great place to make a lot of money. That's not, if you want to make money from selling your book, the trade is not the place to go unless you are a high profile author who has the likelihood of selling hundreds of thousands of copies of your book. And even then, the publisher is getting pretty rich in the process of you making a decent living, possibly. So that's your sales profits from trade sales. Now let's talk about your sales profits for you as the organization selling this book, should you decide to do so. Obviously, you aren't probably going to sell all your books. You might be giving some away. You might be using them as premiums for donors or using them for onboarding new people as they come into your organization. But hypothetically, let's look here at the numbers. So let's say you, the same book, you purchased one book at a time, which I wouldn't recommend doing, but we're just looking at the worst case scenario here. You self-published a book, you put a $16.99 print cost on it, or some $16.99 retail cost on it. The print cost is $5.64. You will make a net of $11.35 on each book. And I would say that that is the minimum that you will make on that book, because if you decide to do a larger print run and you print even 1,000 copies of that book, you will not be paying $5.64 a book. You'll be paying $3.08 a book. Or if you decide to bump up and print 3,000 copies of that book, it'll only be $1.54 per book. And so you can see that as you print more copies, your cost goes down, and then your potential profit from selling that book, should you decide to do so, rises significantly. Now, let's go over to traditional publishing. So let's say a traditional publisher, you traditionally published a book with a mainstream publisher, and they have given you an author discount of about 60%, which is pretty good. So you are paying $6.80 a book, or I'm sorry, you're paying $10.19 a book instead of if you published it yourself. And then you decide to sell that book at $16.99 for retail, then you'll make about $6.80 a book. So you can see that even if you do traditionally publish a book, you will make more money as an organization from selling those books directly than you will make from Amazon selling those books and passing along to you the profits for that. So this gives you an idea of the costs and the potential revenue surrounding book sales, depending on whether you are doing it as an organization and investing in all the other costs I mentioned earlier in terms of publishing the book, as well as selling it and distributing it through Ingram. So I want to stop there because there might be some questions related to these two charts, and I want to make sure people have an opportunity to ask them.
We have one question from Barb. She's asking, at what point do you tend to start marketing a book?
Yeah. Well, historically, traditional publishers will begin marketing up to 6 months before the book comes out. They want to generate pre-sales. They want to get an idea of how many copies they should print based on the level of interest in the book. I would say that organizational publishers do not typically follow that same model. First of all, they don't necessarily have the same marketing access to retailers or to other places where you would market books or advertise for books. And so they may not have that same cycle. They might start talking about a book a month or two before it's released. And the beauty of self-publishing, or one of the beauties of self-publishing or organizational publishing, is that you can quickly get a book into the market, and you do not have the same long lead time that a traditional publisher would. So that's an advantage. But I would say that traditional publishers have a system down to getting, creating catalogs in advance. Advanced catalogs is what they call them, with their new titles or their upcoming titles in it. And then they might have a sales team that is talking about those books and providing more details and channeling marketing to retailers that they think maybe have an interest in that book, whether it's be niche retailers or church bookstores or other boutique type purchasers. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I would just say that we have a lot more freedom as a non-traditional publisher or an organizational publisher to market your book later in the process. And I would also say you do not want to spend too much time marketing your book before it's available. You want people to be able to make that instinctive purchase. And whether that's pre-purchasing the book, which you can set up on Amazon, or set up through your distribution platform, and so the book will show up as available for purchase and for pre-order on Amazon, but the book will not be delivered until the actual publishing date comes. And so you can function as an organization in some of the same ways that a traditional publisher would, but you don't have to deal with the long timelines leading up to it.
We have one other question if you want to take it.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is from Matt. He's asking, can I self-publish and print several hundred books at a printer and then turn around and also put it on Amazon for POD and a Kindle version?
Yes, you could do that. So it is not as though once you upload your book with a publisher or a distributor like Ingram Lightning Source that you are not allowed to print that book anywhere else. You maintain and retain the rights to that book. Although I would say that their prices are very competitive, and from my experience, I have print both small print runs through Ingram Lightning Source as well as larger print runs of several thousand, and also gotten quotes and estimates from local printers and others, and typically they are competitive. So and the quality is what you would need as well. So you can do that. There's nothing stopping you from doing small print runs at a local printer, but also keeping your book in distribution in the trade through Ingram Lightning Source. That is a model that you can pursue. Oops, I want to move on here. So let's just talk about a few recommendations before we have any other questions. The first thing I would do, if you're considering this as an organization, is to really focus on content. Really recognize that a book is something that will have a much longer lifespan in your marketing strategy than a web article, sometimes even than a video or a brochure or a magazine. It is going to last a while. And because of that, you want to commit to it the level of attention to detail and focus that you would expect from something that you're making an investment in like that. I would also see that your book should exist within your content ecosystem as an organization. So you need to look and see, where does it fit? Does it reinforce the messaging that we are sending out in other platforms and other channels? Or does it conflict, or does it seem to be just sitting out there and doesn't have any relationship to these? Because all these other channels, whether it's your social channels, your web, your video, your other printed materials, those all have the ability to drive attention to your book and to generate interest in it. So you want to make sure that you're utilizing them for that. And so see this as part of your content ecosystem. I think also even creating a content around the book. So making sure there's a microsite for it that might have small group materials or downloadable free chapters or video excerpts where the author is sharing things from the book or additional content or expressing his or her personality in such a way that makes the book even more attractive to read. Also making sure that a microsite like that is capturing names and addresses and leads for, if you're giving away content, make sure that you capture an email address so that and you continue to market the book to those people or market other programs and resources that your organization has. So create a content ecosystem around a microsite for the book. Also, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't attempt to write a book that's already been written by someone else or to improve on it. Try to come up with something that is unique within your market and that it's compelling to people with its own merits is what I'm saying. Another thing too would be don't be afraid to give away content. Give away the book if you have to. You shouldn't be prioritizing making money first of all. If you're a nonprofit or if you're a ministry, your goal is one of advocacy. You are not in a position most likely to use a book to generate enough funds to be a significant amount of your organizational budget or income. I guess there are some exceptions to that, but the book is going to have far greater value as a marketing tool than it will as a revenue generator. So prioritize that. Create study guides, online learning, small group resources to accompany your book, video promos, social posts, all these things to create content around your book. I would highly recommend that. Also, from a content standpoint, prioritize brevity and readability. And this is where you need to have a ruthless editor on your team or hire someone who has some expertise in this area to really make sure that that book is as short as it can be and no longer than it needs to be, because you want to value your readers' time, and people's attention spans are lower than they were, shorter than they were years ago. So you want to value that and make sure that it's punchy and compelling and powerful, and that it's not bloated and weighed down with things that do not carry the core message of the book forward. Also, do not overlook quality and design, because as I said, people judge a book by its cover. They judge it by the quality of the manuscript. They see spelling errors or typos or design problems, and they will question the value of the book and question the message as well. So it's something that you really don't want to overlook. And then also just, integrate the book with your broader content strategy. I think I said this earlier, just making sure that the book is one of many pieces. It is not the silver bullet for you as an organization, but it can be very powerful and really beneficial to you, both internally and externally, if you do it right. So that's what I have. Any questions, additional questions people might have before we move on and close up shop?
Matt, you were mentioning that you were going to share why you decided to publish. Why is the Great Commission still great with a traditional publisher?
Yeah. Okay. So this was a situation where we considered publishing Steve Richardson's book ourselves, and but I had a sense that the message was broad enough in its potential reach, and also we have published quite a few books ourselves over the years, and I think I showed some of the sales numbers there, and I felt that even though those were good, I felt our president probably deserved to get a bit more of a marketing foothold that could be offered by a traditional publisher, and so The downside of that is, of course, that we are using a lot of these books for marketing purposes, and we are paying more for them than we would if we had published it ourselves. However, we did not have any initial outlay of expenses apart from Steve's own time and someone else on staff who assisted with that project. So I guess with that whole question, I would definitely approach this on a case-by-case basis. And if your organization has a leader who does have a fairly significant profile, and if there is a publisher that's willing to take you on and invest the resources that they will need to invest in publishing your book, I would definitely consider it. So I think for us, none of the previous titles that we've published here at Pioneers, I don't think would have been compelling enough to a publisher for them to take us on. And so whether that, it's hard to tell whether the idea that you have is going to be of interest to them until you submit a proposal. And so what we did is we submitted a proposal to several publishers, recognizing that if they said no, we would be willing to do it ourselves. But if they said yes, then we wanted to see whether they could get us a little deeper and further reach than we could on our own. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that I hope it doesn't sound like it's contradicting my message here in this webinar, because I think there's a place for both types of publishing for us as nonprofits and ministries.
That's great, Matt. For those of you who are attending, the handout, the PowerPoint slides, they're up. There's a link to them up in the chat panel right now. Scott Dalton is just commenting that Amazon KDP has been great for their ministry for a few books. I know we use Amazon KDP as well for EMQ, and that the quality is great. It really publishes a good quality magazine for us and books for others. Matt, while other people are thinking of any other questions that they want to ask, I want to ask you, is there any specific example that you could share, and you can make it generic, of a challenge that you have experienced in publishing, self-publishing, and how you overcame it?
Yeah. So if you're an organization and you're publishing a book for someone on your staff, whether it's your president or a staff person, and it is a partnership. And I think some of the big challenges that we've had over the years, and they've not been insurmountable, but there are usually creative differences. And sometimes they're in the strangest areas. They might be something in the text that an author really wants to include. And as an organizational leader myself, who oversees our publishing arm, my primary goal is not for their self-actualization of their story. It is actually the organization's brand. I'm a steward of Pioneer's brand and our position in the evangelical Christian world as a mission organization. So in some ways, it's a little different relationship maybe than a publisher that is working with an author to help them create an expression from their heart, right? So I think there's been times where both from cover designs have often been opportunities for conflict and tension, because you have people get very emotionally involved in a cover for their book. But if it's coming from an organization, it needs to reflect that organization's brand well. And so there can be tension there. I think also just, the creative things, both visual and textual creativity has been potential landmines that we've had to navigate over the years with authors.
How about, Matt, an example of success, surprising success that you've experienced?
Yeah. I think so one of the first books we did was a book called The Spiritual Survival Handbook for Cross-Cultural Church Planters. And that was one of a pastor who had already written a book on church planting. So he wrote a book called Spiritual Survival Guide for Church Planters. And someone in the Pioneers ecosystem found this book and adapted it for cross-cultural church planters and made some changes to it. And then he actually also contributed more content. And we published that book about 10 years ago. And it has just been consistently used and distributed throughout our staff, people going to the field. And then it's also been translated, I think, into about 4 or 5 languages, into, I think, Indonesian, Spanish, Portuguese. There might have been 1 or 2 other languages as well. So that's just very gratifying to have a book that it's not making a lot of money. The author has since passed away, and we do give some resources to his widow for each sale of the book, or even the books that we just distribute for free. But that is one that kind of came out of nowhere. It was kind of a serendipitous opportunity, but from a value internally, it's been pretty significant to our organization. Now, but it also has sold consistently several thousand copies every year on Amazon. I don't know who's buying these, but it is selling. So that's an example of something that in the book world, the average book, and this would be both self-published, co-published, traditionally published books, the average book only sells, about 2,500 copies, I think. So now that there's a many that sell far less than that, and many that sell in the hundreds of thousands and millions. But most books don't sell that many. So that has been very gratifying to us to see that book actually have an impact in ministry within our ecosystem.
That's great, Matt. Is there anything else you'd like to share? We don't have any further questions.
Okay. No, just I would just say that over the years, our team has connected with other organizations that have wanted to do things like this and have been able to offer insight and help. And I would hope maybe a way to bypass some of the mistakes that we've made along the way. And we remain willing to do that. And my email address is here on this slide. And I would welcome anyone who wants to reach out, and would be happy to help you take the next steps for your organization getting involved in either co-publishing, or if you want to hear about what we've learned from traditional publishers.
Make sure you look out for our next webinar scheduled for January 19th at 2 p.m. presented by Mary Tyndall. It is called Thought Leadership for Servant Leaders. And this webinar will be all about thought leadership writing and even ghost writing for your leaders. I think that you'll really enjoy it. So please check it out and sign up for it. Until next time, I encourage you to consider joining the communications group, which you can find after clicking the groups word up on the top menu of the website, the Missio Nexus website. This will enable you to connect with other people engaged in marketing and communications. Thank you, everyone who joined and participated with us. I'm Heather Pubels, along with Mary Kay and Hannah, our production team.